Is Feitan star level? No. However, he does have the power of the sun, and I'll explain what that means and why it's not star level throughout the rest of this video, as well as talking about how strong is Feitan from Hunter x Hunter. What this video covers, in order: Feitan's Nen abilities and the advantages of having Nen, Feitan's speed, then Feitan's attack potency, then we'll talk about the Pain Packer's demonstrated power, as well as its potential power, and then we'll talk about at the very end where Feitan compares to other characters in Hunter x Hunter. Let's go to our first category where we are checking Feitan's Nen abilities and the advantages of having Nen, starting with the advantages of having Nen. Starting with the basics of Nen, we can say that all Nen is composed of an aura, the life energy produced by all living bodies, and is vital for survival, directly linked to one's stamina. And then we can take it a step further. Nen is then freely manipulating that aura so that it can come from the body itself. Using Nen itself, you can use several basic techniques which are applying to all Nen users, including Feitan. One of these techniques is example of 10, which focuses the regulation of Nen throughout the body, which can strengthen the body and even drastically slow down aging. We then have Ren, which Ren drastically raises your aura for a combat-like situation. Opposite to that, we then have a technique called Zetsu, which allows you to split from your aura, effectively making you invisible to things that could sense aura. Nen itself is spiritual and mental in nature, effectively making it that anyone who doesn't have a resistance will have no way of resisting, because there is nothing stopping it on a spiritual and mental level. However, it gets even worse. You see, if you've got no resistance to Nen, then what happens is Nen will have your body and your willpower directly contradicting one another. This will cause greater strain on your body and can even cause you to die from just the aura itself without ever approaching someone. The best example of this is of course Gon and Killua in the hallway trying to approach Hisoka. Gon has more willpower than Killua, so while Killua is unable to move and Killua is stronger than Gon, Gon can move. However, Gon moving forward is contradicting what his body itself is saying, so in doing so, if he was to keep getting closer and closer, his body will be broken down as he is rejecting what his body is telling him. So therefore it's best to actually not approach if you don't have Nen, and it turns your own willpower against you as you're effectively breaking down your own body. And these are just the very basics. Now let's go, still in the basics, but something a little bit more advanced. Using a more advanced application of Zetsu, Nen users can effectively hide their aura even from other Nen users. This is called In, and it's very important for when you're going against other people who can sense spiritual and mental attacks. Using a more advanced application of Ren, called a gyro, Nen users can then strengthen parts of their body. By strengthening their eyes, the Nen users can then see attacks hidden by In, making it a fundamental necessity for all Nen users, including Feitan. Another one is called Ryu, where by using different percentages of Nen in parts of their body, going beyond 10%, they can strengthen the natural flow of that part of the body. So if they're at 20%, that's double normal, 30% is triple normal, etc. If they were to go all the way up to 10 times or 100%, that is a combination called Ken, where you combine both Ten and Ren to fortify the body 10 times what its previous max was. If Gyro and Zetsu, Ten, Hatsu, and Ren are all used together at 100% of the parts of the body, it becomes Kyo, being 10 times stronger than even Ken. To balance all of this, the technique Ryu is used more to manage the flow of everything so that there are no delays in terms of how long it takes them to transfer different percentages of Nen to different parts of the body. The next basic that you should be aware of is that of En. En is the emitted area where you project your Nen so that you can sense your surroundings like a sixth sense. Someone at Feitan's level should probably be able to go up to 50 meters, given how high level of a hunter he is. The next basic one that he should have is called Shu. Shu is a Nen ability much like Ken and Kyo, but instead of reinforcing part of your body, what's being reinforced is a weapon or item. Feitan himself uses this with his umbrella for sneak attacks like he does against Zarzon. Lastly is Hatsu. Hatsu is the ability most people know of Nen, and that is essentially their Nen ability unique to them. The best Hatsu abilities are those that match the Nen user's own Nen affinities. Feitan's Hatsu is that of the Pain Packer, as you all know, and as you see at the start of this video. The Pain Packer is a combination of 3 different aspects of Nen, that being transmutation, conjuration, and emission. I'll be talking more about the Pain Packer later. Now let's move on to Feitan's speed. Let's do some example calculations, giving us sort of an idea of how fast Feitan is, at least when he's being very relaxed and casual. This first calculation is against one of the Mafia goons, where Feitan moves so fast, despite the fact he doesn't even take his hands out of his pocket, and it is done in just a single step, that he's able to chop this guy's head off before he's able to even perceive it. Based on Feitan's height of 1.55 meters, we can say that the distance he must have moved was over 7 meters, and given the time frame to blitz someone's perception being 1/60th of a second, that gives a speed of 422 meters per second, or Mach 1.2. Considering once again he had one of his hands in his pocket and the animation shows it in a single step, he very much could have gone much faster if he had actually tried. Now for a calculation that's a little bit faster, and once again it's against the Mafia lot. Feitan once again is still 1.55 meters tall, but in this next calculation we only really need to know the top portion of Feitan, which is a bit smaller at 0.6 meters. Using that we can find how fast and how far he must have blitzed these several different Mafia goons, moving this exact line for these distance. Doing so, that totals at about 12.69 meters. Given once again the time frame of human perception of 1/60th of a second, we can say that Feitan was moving at least 761 meters per second, or Mach 2.2. Interestingly, unlike the other feat, Feitan doesn't show any glow around his body. This very much indicates this is likely a feat Feitan did without even using any Nen enhancements, and this is the speed of Feitan just with his raw physical capabilities. Using Nen, he would be much faster. Now for Feitan's best speed feat, and that is against Zaza. When he's able to move around so fast, he creates several afterimages. We'll be using the manga, as this is a more clear idea of the distance he would have travelled, as well as the number of afterimages. This calculation will also be the most basic to start off with, as it gets quite complex when you consider all the factors. So we'll be starting off with a basic low end before we move on to the full calculation. Using Feitan's height of 1.55 meters, and then looking at the total distance he must have moved, we can say the distance he moved is approximately 30 meters. We then use the human perception to say he moved in 1/60th of a second, to say that the speed he moved at is 1,800 meters per second, or about Mach 5.2. However, there are several factors that would make this feat far more impressive. Allow me to explain what these are. First, the number of afterimages matter. You can see that there are 16 copies of Feitan in this image. One of them is going to be the real Feitan, while the other 15 are likely afterimages. Normally we use a time frame of 1/60th of a second for human perception. However, because there are 15 afterimages, that means he has 1/15th of the time to be in each of those spots within the 1/60th of a second, resulting in an actual time frame of 1/900th of a second. The reason why this is a property that you can see in standing waves. As the standing wave gets faster and faster, we can see more nodes or harmonics, which are the top part of the wave. These represent different parts of human perception as it goes, matching our perception to be much faster, and appearing multiple times. This phenomenon is identical to how afterimages work when there are more than one. Therefore, if we have multiple afterimages, the speed feat is much more impressive as it multiplies by the number of afterimages there are.
In an old video of mine, I explained how Gon, who progressively got better throughout the Hunter exam, surpassed the speed of sound. Now Gon is considered by Killua far inferior and likely the weakest to pass the Hunter exam. This implies all hunters who can surpass the Hunter exam should be faster than the speed of sound. This then means instead of using a perception of 1/60th of a second, we actually have justification to use a perception of 1/343rd of a second. However, this is before the introduction of Nen into Hunter x Hunter. It is said by Kurapika that Nen is likely the difference between that of a child and adult, providing several dozen times that with those without Nen. This means just learning the basics would give you a multiplier of at least 36 times, making perception shoot up even further to 1/12,000th of a second. However, even that is better because Zarzan is much better than a beginner of Nen, as those who hunt a Chimera Ant officer need to already be at professional level. In Greed Island, Gon, who is beyond the basics of Nen, could only hold Nen for only about 2 minutes. However, in the Chimera Ant arc, when he's training, he needs to be able to maintain it for 3 hours. The difference between 2 minutes and 3 hours is a 90 times multiplier. This means the perception at minimum for a professional hunter compared to a Chimera Ant officer should at least be 1/1,000,000th of a second. Now let's do the calculation 3 properly. This means we'll be using the full context of the two things I've just talked about, when you have multiple after images which increase the needed perception, as well as the standards for someone like Zarzan as opposed to just a normal human being. We said before that a normal human being has the perception of 1/60th of a second. Then we said that someone who can pass the hunter exam has a perception of 343rd of a second, being the perception of the speed of sound. Next, a hunter who is the beginner of using Nen should have a perception of 1/12,000th of a second. Then the perception of a Chimera Ant officer or a professional hunter should be at least 1/1,000,000th of a second. Since Zarzan is better than a Chimera Ant officer, and has at least this level of perception, but then Feitan makes 15 after images in Zarzan's perception, that means this feat is performed in 1/15th of 1/1,000,000th of a second, or a total of 1/16,000,000th of a second. So instead of the basic speed calculation, which gave us approximately 5.2 times the speed of sound, we instead have a calculation giving us 504 million meters per second, or about 1.68 times the speed of light. Now let's look at how powerful Feitan is, and doing so we'll be scaling off this feat from a Chimera Ant. Now upscaling from this Chimera Ant, we can see that its backside was able to an explosive fart, which it has a mixture, which is explained in the manga, to use hydrochlorian. Using Killua's height of 1.58 meters, we can then compare him to the size of the trees around him, which were a massive 16.6 meters even when we can't see the full thing. If we use this, and we later look at the image in the manga where we see a tree is only 20 pixels tall, we can estimate the size of the explosion, giving it dimensions of 132 meters in height, 219 meters in length, and 116 meters in width. If we do a volume of an ellipsoid, that's 3.5 million cubic meters, and then we use the explanation of it being hydrochlorian to find out its density at 1.3 grams per cubic centimeter to get a total mass of 4.5 billion kilograms. We then use its boiling point of 285 degrees and a specific heat of 139.7 joules per kilogram per degree, and we can finally get the final energy of this extremely big fart. And this energy is 182 trillion joules, or 43.6 kilotons of TNT. This is town level. Feitan is much more powerful than just a basic Chimera Ant, and we can actually find a way to find a multiplier for how much stronger he would at least be from the Ant's fart calculation. And to do that we need to look at the fight with Zarzan. How initially he was too slow to even keep up with Zarzan, but by the end of it he's so much faster than Zarzan he has his 15 after. Let's look at it here.
敵じゃないわね。顔をザバッと洗って出直してらっしゃいの。
確かに。
あら、意外と素直ね。
かなり私腕なまってるね。いい練習台見つけたよ。
でもフェイタン動き良くないね。
本調子じゃないようだな。
Since Feitan, even while out of shape, should be above 43.6 kilotons of TNT, and in shape he's at least 15 times stronger, we then can say that Feitan's attack potency without using his Hatso should at least be 2.7 quadrillion joules, or about 654 kilotons of TNT, which is large town level. Now some consistency to add on Feitan being large town level, we can look at a much earlier arc in Hunter x Hunter. If you watched my video where I talk about 15 feats of power in Hunter x Hunter, you'll know that one of the things I calculated was just Uber King, one of the other characters in the series, simply powering up. When he powered up, he shattered the side of a mountain, and even a very low-end calculation, where I assume it's not even a mountain as it's only 207 meters tall, that gets already to town level. And then what we can also use is one of his punches earlier on against the parasite people was able to do a massive crater that when calculated was at small city level. And what's more impressive about that calculation is Uvakin did so at less than 20%, as he only powered up to 20% when fighting Kurapika. So with that, it's very consistent for someone like Feitan to easily be at a large town level, considering a suppressed Uvakin was already at the small city level. Now let's look at how powerful the Pain Packer is. More specifically, we'll be starting off with the Rising Sun. We know that when the Pain Packer's Rising Sun is activated, the description given on screen is burnt by the sun. This concretely tells us that the Pain Packer is reproducing the effect of the sun itself. Now the effect of the sun is not the power to destroy a star, so it's not star level. It is not the power to create a sun, so it's not star level. And it's definitely not the power generated by an Earth-sized sun, because it's not the size of the Earth-sized sun. Instead, it is the effect of the sun producing the same energy of a star the size of Feitan's mini-sun, and not including the extra energy of just a star existing. The energy produced by a sun like this can be defined by its number of electrons. The electron density of a star is researched to be 10 to the power of 26 per cubic centimeter. Using Feitan's height at 1.55 meters tall at 25 pixels, the mini-star is approximately 13.5 meters across, giving it a volume of 1,291 cubic meters. Using the number of electrons, we can then say that the number of electrons in this star must be 1.29 times 10 to the power of 35. That sounds like a lot, but the mass of an electron is absolutely tiny at 9.11 times 10 to the power of minus 31 kilograms, making the mass of this mini star 117,000 kilograms. Now that sounds like a lot, but for actual context, if it was the full density of the sun, it would instead weigh 1.8 million kilograms, or 15.5 times the 117,000 kilograms we get for just the electrons as the effect of the sun. This means we are creating raw energy to create a mass of 117,000 kilograms. The equation to do this is E equals mc squared, which gives us a final energy of 10.5 sextillion joules, which is small country level. However, this is not the full power of the Pain Packer, even now. You see, the part of the Pain Packer that emits the energy of the sun is the emission part, and Feitan is a transmutator. If we look at the chart of Nen for different Nen units, if you're a transmutator, your emission is only at about 60%. Your conjuration is at 80% and your transmutation is at 100%. So if the 60% emission is this small country level, the conjuration, which is the armor, would be about 33% stronger than the small country level attack, which explains why when wearing this armor, Feitan is perfectly fine. Meanwhile, the transmutation aspect, which represents the full portion of the Nen being used, is nearly double that of what is the small country level. Of course, this isn't used in the attack itself, so it's not very useful, but it is useful for knowing that the armor is about 33% stronger than the Pain Packer's Rising Sun. Now, one thing you may be asking, is it narratively consistent for the Pain Packer to be at a small country level, if Feitan himself, in his normal attack potency without his Hatsu, only being large town level? And the answer is yes, and there's a few reasons why we can show this. First, similar characters at large town level, such as Finks, could be killed by the Pain Packer from pretty much the other side of the Chimera ant nest. This is shown by him running away for his dear life and only popping out once the Pain Packer is fully gone. The next thing is because the Pain Packer is a reactive Nenhatsu. For those of you who don't know, reactive Nenhatsus from a counteractive ability are much more powerful than normal ones. A good example of a really overpowered counteractive Nen ability is that of Princess Carmilla in one of the later arcs, where she has an ability that should anyone ever kill her, she instantly revives using their life force, killing them instead. This basically makes her unkillable by pretty much anyone in the series, so it's very broken to have a counteractive ability, and the Pain Packer is counteractive to the pain that Feitan has faced. Furthermore, because of the condition that the more pain Feitan's had, the stronger the ability, it also works as a pledge. For those of you who don't know, pledges are a way to add a multiplier to your Nen ability. This is shown with Kurapika when he's been explained as simply using Nen normally is your physical strength, then your Nen strength added together. However, should you have a pledge, your pledge condition adds a multiplier to your Nen when the condition is active. So that means when Kurapika made it so he could only target 13 people with his Nen ability out of the 8 billion in the world, he effectively had a several hundred million times multiplier on his Nen whenever he fights someone in the Phantom Troop. This is why he can take on members of the Phantom Troop but is much weaker against other people. It's because of the pledge. Now the pledge that Feitan has is the amount of pain he has before the Pain Packer. The more pain, the more powerful. And in this example against Zarzan completely snapped his arm, as you can see pointing in the other direction. So in that case, that is the pain level of this feat. The Pain Packer can be much greater should he experience more pain. So if someone had broken more of his arms, if he had multiple fractures, etc. And with that explains why the Pain Packer is narratively consistent to be at a far greater level than that of Feitan. Now in this video I said I would cover the abilities of Nen, Feitan's speed, attack potency, as well as that of the Pain Packer, and that's all been done. The one thing we haven't covered yet is how Feitan compares to others in Hunter x Hunter. So that's what we'll do now. Where does Feitan scale in Hunter x Hunter? Now first, let's talk about characters that are a bad matchup for Feitan, because while Feitan is easily able to take on people who are brutes at a leader class level of a Chimera Ant, there are those that are just bad matchups. A good example of this would be someone like Illumi, who using his needles could literally paralyze and prevent Feitan from doing anything in just a single attack, because that's the hacks of his ability. Someone like Hisoka with his bungee gum and high IQ could easily immobilize Feitan, preventing him from taking damage to activate a Pain Packer, as well as has better stats to be able to get in that situation in the first place. An interesting character who is a bad matchup but better than that of Hisoka or Illumi is that of Machi. Machi's Nen ability is quite useful and similar to Hisoka's, as well as she is a high IQ character with good skill. However, Feitan is also relative to her in pretty much everything, making it a quite close matchup to see who would win between that of Machi and Feitan. However, those who are a terrible matchup against that of Feitan, so that he could easily beat them, are those of brute force characters who can't one-shot him and that he is faster than. A good example of that would be like Finks. Finks is rivaling Feitan in terms of physical power, however he is much slower based on the speed feats that are shown within the series, as well as that Feitan's Pain Packer only needs him to take damage once, and he can effectively one-shot Finks whenever he wants. Another example of this would be then Uvukin. Uvukin is not being able to one-shot Kurapika, so he couldn't be able to one-shot Feitan, and he would just be in a similar situation to that of Finks. This can even be applied to stronger characters, such as Silver Zoldyck, who, using his strongest attack on an off-guard Chrollo, couldn't even damage his clothes that much. Zeno's basic attacks did more damage. And even the likes of a Royal Guard like Shiapoof lacks the attack potency to one-shot Feitan. And with Feitan's ironically better speed feats than Shiapoof, he would likely just Pain Packer and beat Shiapoof as well. There are characters who are brute force based characters who can probably take on Feitan and still win with the bad matchup, examples being that of Zeno and Yuppie. Yuppie has decent speed feats, taking on hundreds of copies of Knuckle all at the same time and one-shotting them, meaning he could likely one-shot Feitan, but even if he doesn't, he has the speed to try again. If he doesn't do it and Feitan gets the Pain Packer off, he could beat Yuppie. That's like a 50-50 to see who wins. Zero's in a similar circumstance, but he actually does a little bit better than Yuppie in the sense of he's a much more experienced and intelligent fighter, as well as his attacks are usually from range, so he gets the advantage of not being as close to Feitan in the first place. Where Feitan absolutely caps and he could never go any higher are characters who can beat the likes of Neferpitou. Pitou is just a level that's too high for Feitan to reach, being faster and stronger than anything he could do, and also just a better fighter overall. So that's where Feitan compares to some of the higher tier characters in Hunter x Hunter. And with that, thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed my unique Hunter x Hunter scaling, I have a playlist of 4 other videos, 3 of which on speed, 1 on 15 different feats of power in Hunter x Hunter. They may surprise you. Also, check out in the description of this video a list of different power scalers that I think are quite good and you might enjoy if you go check out their content. And with that, hope you all have a good day. Thank you all for watching. Goodbye.